I want to begin this meeting with the women's prayer that has been in place since the beginning of our organization in the 1980s. It was written by Joan Gundersen. Charlie, could you put that up? O God, creator of all life, bless the unsung lives of countless Christian women in every century who were your hands and feet, who kept alive your compassionate presence by feeding the hungry, nursing the sick, clothing the naked, comforting the sad, praying and petitioning, strengthening those in prison, teaching the stories, sewing and singing, weeping and rejoicing. Grant us the wisdom to discern our ministries in this day as our foremothers found theirs. Lead us in new and timeless forms of discipleship, and let us joyfully find our place in this procession of praise, offering our varied gifts and voices together with them and Mary, the mother of our Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen. This presentation will be given by Dr. Joan Gundersen. And before I turn this over to her, I want to tell you a little bit about her. She earned her PhD in history from the University of Notre Dame and has been teaching women's history since 1972. After an academic career that spanned more than 3 decades, publication of numerous books and articles, and service as a senior college administrator, she took on the series of administrative tasks for the Diocese of Pittsburgh as it rebuilt following schism. This included service at the diocesan archivist when she first ran across materials on Deaconess Byllesby. Now retired from the diocese, she continues to teach women's history for extended studies programs at the University of Pittsburgh and Carnegie Mellon University. Virginia Theological Seminary awarded her an honorary Doctor of Humane Letters degree in 2019. Joan has been a member of EWIP from the beginning and has been on the EWIP board for many years. Presently, she's the chair of the awards committee at EWIP. I want to say that Joan will give her presentation, and then we will have about 10 or 15 minutes at the end. If you have any questions or comments you wish to make, please write them in the chat room. Or we may have time to have you raise your hand at the end, but the chat room's the sure thing. So with that, I will turn it over to Joan Gundersen, who will tell us about Deaconess Ruth Byllesby, and I can't wait to hear what she has to say.
Ruth Byllesby was honored on April 15, 2012 by the Bishop of Georgia as a diocesan saint. Byllesby, who died in 1959, was honored for her work with the families of local mill workers during the grim days of the Depression and World War II, working through Christ Church in Augusta, Georgia. She converted the rectory of Christ Church into the neighborhood house and ran many different programs for the residents of the Harrisburg area in Augusta, where many impoverished families made their home. She was known to provide food and clothing to many families who had otherwise no place to turn. She left Augusta in 1943 at the age of 78, supposedly to retire. But in fact, she continued working into her 90s. Now, in many ways, Byllesby is typical of deaconesses, but she had some unique resources and background that culminated in her work in Augusta. And it's those traits and her background that I'm especially interested in. Ruth Byllesby was born in 1865 in Meadville, Pennsylvania. Her father was the rector of Christ Church, the Episcopal Church there. Father Marison Byllesby was baptized in 1849 when he was 17, along with his brother Faber at St. Andrew's Church in Philadelphia. He was already studying at Virginia Theological Seminary, but he had to wait to be ordained until 1856 as a deacon and 1857 as a priest. After 2 years at a parish in eastern Pennsylvania, he took charge of Christ Church Meadville in November of 1859. He was then 27, single, and living in a boarding house. In 1864, he married Elizabeth Ellis, who had been raised by her widowed father, the local doctor. Once they married, Dr. Ellis bought a house, and Marison and Ruth joined him there. Now, Marison's two brothers were also Episcopal priests in Pennsylvania at that time. In fact, his brother DeWitt, older brother, was in Pittsburgh, and his other brother, Faber, was in Uniontown, Pennsylvania. Marison very quickly became a respected leader in Western Pennsylvania among the church. Now, Ruth's early years were spent in a multi-generational family, including not only her parents, but 3 grandparents, an aunt, and 2 servants. There were 2 young brothers who died of cholera within a month of their birth, leaving her the only child until she is 7. This is the 1870 census. And here is Edward Ellis, who actually owned the house they were living in. And this is actually the sister of one of his dead wife. And here are Marison's father, mother, and sister. Here are the 2 servants. Here is Ruth, age 5, and here are her parents. Marison's parents had come to live with them shortly after this house was built. When Ruth was 5, however, her world was turned upside down because her father left the Meadville parish, first for parishes in the oil country of Pennsylvania, and then in Illinois and Wisconsin. This is the church he served in Oil City. Here is the one in Illinois, and here is the one in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. The parishes are close enough that the family, at least when they were in Oil City, still lived in Meadville. But over the next 5 years, when they moved to the Illinois and Wisconsin parishes, part of the family moved with them. Marison's father had died, but his mother and sister came along. There were the birth of 2 brothers during these years, and finally a sister in 1875. Now, Marison is a builder. He oversaw the enlargement of Christ Church, the building of a church in Oil City, the rebuilding of church buildings in Illinois and Wisconsin following fires. Everywhere he went, he was involved with bricks and mortar construction and the growth of the parish. Her grandfather's house in Meadville, however, remained the point of stability for this family. And in 1875, the family would move officially to Allegheny, which is across the river from Pittsburgh. It's now a part of Pittsburgh. Marison was called to be the rector of a very fashionable parish church there, where he would remain for the next 20 years. Once again, supervising the building, this time of a Richardson building that is on the National Historic Register for architectural value. Ruth, apparently, this is the 1880 census, and the interesting thing about it is, although Marison had a parish in Allegheny, 90 miles away from Meadville, he is listed as a resident in Meadville because much of his family spent their time with the grandfather. Most particularly, Ruth did. Ruth was apparently there because she attended Meadville schools until she left at age 15 to go to Brook Hall in Media, Pennsylvania, just outside of Philadelphia. What was there? Well, it was an Episcopal girls' school. And her uncle DeWitt, who was the one that had been in Pittsburgh, one of the brothers of Marison, was the chaplain at the school and the rector of the local parish there. Brookville was one of these classic women's seminaries with a very elite student body. She graduated in 1883. It's very hard to read, but this is actually the newspaper notice about their graduation, and it lists her as one of a small number. Ruth, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 graduates that year. She will give the graduation address. So while she is at Brook, and while she is close to her uncle, DeWitt Byllesby, she also will get to know her cousin, Henry Marison Byllesby. Now, Henry is busy courting a woman from nearby New Jersey, very wealthy, prominent family, railroad executive's father, and they will marry while Ruth is at Brook Hall, and she's close to both of them. Henry is close in age to Ruth, and so there are all sorts of ties there. So when Ruth graduates and moves back to Pittsburgh and to Meadville, she helps her mother and younger sister, and apparently begins working as a teacher at the industrial school for working class members of the Pittsburgh area that was run by her father's parish. It is her introduction to working class families. Now, the Meadville house is shrinking as her remaining grandparents and her aunt all die in the 1880s. But her cousin, Henry Marison Byllesby, and his bride move to Pittsburgh, where he works for the Westinghouse Company and where he holds some of the major patents in the development of the electric light bulb. He will go on to be a very wealthy person with multiple power companies around the country that are electric power, and eventually also an investment broker. He will have homes in Chicago, New Jersey, Minnesota. You know, they can move around where they wish. In the meantime, Ruth has found her vocation in service to the poor as a church worker. And in 1894, she returns to East in Pennsylvania to study at the newly established Pennsylvania Church Training School and Deaconess Home in Philadelphia. The program includes study in theology. I don't know if you can read it or not on here. The first year you're there, you study ancient church history on Mondays and pastoral theology, and in the afternoon you spend in practical training. Tuesdays, it's Bible class, lessons in English, and history of the prayer book. With Wednesday, it's the Acts of the Apostles and the Creed. Thursday, it's business methods, hygiene and home sanitation. And in the afternoon, study of the First and Second Corinthians and the Old Testament. Similar kind of mix of studies in the senior year with, if you'll notice, a lot of those, at least 3 afternoons a week devoted to practical training. And that really meant internships in a variety of the helping institutions in the area. By the time she finishes her studies in 1896, Ruth's family has shrunk even further. In fact, she now has one brother, one sister, and her mother. Her father has died just months before she finishes her course of study. There is, of course, a network of cousins, including Henry Marrison Byllesby and his wife, Margaret. Now, Brother Langton had died in 1895 from consumption, and it is likely that their father died from the same disease in early 1896. But that fall, Ruth was set apart as a deaconess. She was given orders by the Bishop of Pittsburgh, Bishop Whitehead, Cortland Whitehead, and Bishop Boyd Vincent of Southern Ohio, who had just the year before set apart the first deaconess for Ohio from the Philadelphia Training School. She was set apart in a major ceremony at Trinity Church in downtown Pittsburgh. Here's the inside and the exterior. This was a fairly interesting piece of news in this day. And in fact, here's the Pittsburgh newspapers covering it in various ways, but they weren't alone. All of these, they put out a press release, and it was picked up in multiple cities around the eastern part of the United States, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Pennsylvania, New Jersey. Philadelphia had several, Wilmington, Delaware, and those are just the papers I could find that had this notice. It was called an unusual event, the setting apart of a deaconess. There were 10 clergy who participated in that ceremony. They made it a very big diocesan event because Bishop Whitehead really would have liked to have seen more deaconesses in the area. She is Pittsburgh's first deaconess, and she is assigned first to St. Paul's, which was then in what was the Hill District of Pittsburgh, and was it was in one of the older parishes, but struggling because of changing demographics in that area. She would soon move to Calvary, which was a little further into the East End, but Calvary, which was a very prominent parish with lots of very wealthy people, would in fact continue to would have missions that they were running in the working class areas, especially over near where the University of Pittsburgh was starting up, and in the Hill District where St. Paul's was. Now, Bishop Whitehead really wanted to recruit others, but he had several people who started study. They didn't necessarily finish. His biggest problem, though, was finding funding for Ruth. The Women's Auxiliary in Pittsburgh was already paying the salary of Deaconess Sybil Carter, who was running Indian lace ministries in several states and was not at all from Pittsburgh, but had been adopted by the Women's Auxiliary. So he couldn't go, they declined to fund another deaconess. Ruth's own salary was $300 a year when they finally did find a source for it, about $5.76 a week, just a little more than most textile workers were making. Her work in the Hill District of St. Paul's, she was a rector's assistant doing outreach to the poor of the parish. St. Paul's is in the Lower Hill District. It had families at all levels of poverty. She would stress that deaconesses were better able to reach those families and respond to their needs, especially in the case of distributing work to women that they could do at home and help by raising money for their family, in particular sewing. She also worked at St. Matthew's Mission in the Oakland area, which was the home to a number of British families that were working in the Pittsburgh mills. Her first report as a deaconess, which was published in the diocesan annual journal for the convention, ran 2 pages. She had made 247 visits to millworker families, taught a boys' Sunday school class, organized and trained an altar guild, a mothers' meeting, a sewing guild, a sewing school, and a children's guild, A savings stamp branch had been set up to help the women create some small resources. She taught a series of Lenten classes, has spoke at several guild meetings, and attended the Women's Auxiliary as delegate from the St. Matthew's Mission. Now, that report only covered 6 months. Now, one of the newspapers, and I have the headline here, and you can see the article here, actually interviewed her at the end of her first year at Pittsburgh. And this, I'm going to quote, I'm going to read directly out of a piece of that article. Her work is a combination of city missionary and rector's assistant, while also including the part of a district visitor. Today, we call that a social worker. Through her, the rector becomes acquainted with a large number of people under his care. In the Episcopal Church are to be found the two extremes of society, the very rich and the very poor. And it is to the latter that the deaconess almost wholly confines her work. Becoming the personal friend of the people, she is called on in times of joy and sorrow, and her words of counsel and advice carry with them the assurance of friendly help and sympathy. The families were truly hurting it when she started her work because Pittsburgh was in a depression, so was the US. They are out of work. And she commented that, quote, I have been able to give some relief in the distribution of money, food, clothing, and coal orders. The interview also revealed that her other work at St. Matthew's includes her conducting the religious services on occasion. She will head the Junior Women's Auxiliary, which is the version of the Episcopal Women's Organization today, but for younger women as teenagers. Now, she continued her work, but she is now joined by her mother and sister. And I can actually find the address of their house. And that is in the Oakland area. In fact, these bigger areas that you're seeing here are, this is one of the universities. This is some of the open space that is part of those universities today. And so now she has her mother and her sister with her. She continues to do this kind of work with mill families through Calvary's appointment. And that is an upscale congregation. So some of the time she's working with very wealthy women and young girls and families. And part of the time, most of the time, she is working with very poor families. She was planning in 1903 a new fresh air movement for young women to be able to spend some time away from the smoky city in a farm where they will have a chance to have an actual vacation. But in 1903, she does what almost every other deaconess that Bishop Whitehead tried to recruit or encourage to get the study did, and that is to leave Pittsburgh. These are the other two that actually came from Pittsburgh and went immediately out into other duties before they never even really picked up anything in Pittsburgh. They were sent from Pittsburgh, but they went elsewhere. And part of it was that while they loved having Ruth around, nobody wanted to pay for her. So in 1903, Ruth moves to Redeemer Church in Morristown, New Jersey. Redeemer Church had had a deaconess once before. This area is Margaret Byllesby, the wife of her cousin, home area, and Margaret's sisters are living there. Ruth's mother goes back to Meadville, living in the home she inherited from her father and managing rental properties in Pittsburgh that they owned. Once again, Redeemer Parish, like Calvary in Pittsburgh, is a prosperous parish with a ministry of mill workers in nearby textile mills. They've had deaconesses before, but New Jersey is less willing to see deaconesses as professional church workers in some ways. And so And because she is working for a parish and not for the diocese, it is very hard to track her actions there. While she's listed on the staff of Redeemer in the parish listing that comes out with the parish report each year in the diocesan journal that is published by the convention, there is almost no other mention of her. And the New Jersey bishop did not record her coming into the diocese or leaving the diocese letters to missouri, even though that was required. Issuing them was required by canon, but he only printed the ones or reported the ones to convention for the male clergy. So she's there for several years, but her mother, now back, although mother lived for a short while, or at least visited her in Morristown, her mother becomes ill and is back in Meadville, and Ruth will take leave to go back to Meadville. She expects it to be a short time. It turns out to be 7 years. And she cares for her mother until her mother dies in 1911. This is her mother's will. Their home in Meadville is very close to Allegheny College. And in fact, you can't really see it very well here, but this street is named Byllesby Avenue. And the house, the family house, was just down from that street. Her family matters will keep Ruth occupied until 1914. In 1914, after a trip to Europe with her sister, she apparently goes to Augusta, Georgia for a while. We don't know anything about what she's doing there. All I know is that she shows up in Detroit, Michigan in 1915, having been transferred from the Diocese of Georgia to the Diocese of Michigan by letters to missouri, which the Michigan bishop does deign to include in his reports to the convention. So she begins work at, Christ Church in Detroit. It is towards the center of the inner city. It's an established community. It has again a wealthy membership that runs Christ Church House, which is set up as a settlement house and is serving a Syrian community nearby, especially. She will serve there for 7 years. Now she makes $900 a year, about a third more than women working in the factories in Detroit are making. She is doing church social work with the poor. When she does leave in 1922, she will be replaced by the parish with someone with an actual social work degree. So what is she doing in 1922? Well, she's heading to General Convention in Portland, Oregon. That's also where the Women's Auxiliary Triennial will meet, and a national meeting of the deaconesses at which Harriet Bedell will be set apart as deaconess. And this is the group of deaconesses that were there. Bishop Tuttle was one who did the setting apart. Why is Ruth in the front row? Because she is chair of the National Deaconess Association's Executive Committee. After the meetings are over, all 3 of the national meetings that are being held there, she will spend 6 months in Cokeville, Wyoming on her way back, where there is a new Episcopal parish, and she's going to help the women set up ladies' guilds there and various things. And then she goes back to Michigan, but not to Christ Church, but rather to Grace Episcopal Church in Port Huron. And she will work there as a parish deaconess, mostly working with the education and the youth groups at the church. After several years there, she moves to Burlington, Vermont, and St. Paul's, where again, she is doing mostly this kind of parish work. Why? This is less demanding than working with the poor and doing all of those visits. So why is she doing that? Well, she needed a little more time because she had been appointed in 1919 by a general convention committee that was looking at adapting the office of deaconess to the present tasks of the church. It is she and several other deaconesses are among the first women appointed to any official general convention committee. And she is put in charge of one of the committees, the Committee on Survey and Statistics, which means that she was going to survey all of the existing deaconesses and gather statistics on their situation for them to be able to understand exactly what the positives and the challenges were for the women who were deaconesses. This committee will be active at least until 1928. And it is not successful in getting some of the things through that they had hoped to get through General Convention. They're trying to get deaconesses on a pension plan other than one that they've set up for themselves, which is very poorly funded. They wanted them on the church pension group that had been set up. They were looking at whether women in the deaconesses order were in fact ordained, and they recommended saying they were. That was not approved by General Convention. It is very clear from what the committee did that Ruth supported the recognition of deaconesses as an ordained order and was advocating for their inclusion in the church pension fund. The Philadelphia Training School had its own pension fund, but many deaconesses made so little that they faced a truly impoverished old age. In fact, for a while, you could not enter the order of deaconesses unless you could prove that you had financial resources to support your retirement. By 1927, however, Ruth's financial status was not an issue. She had, and her sister were the only heirs of the property left by her parents. By then,